operations, and a lot of them operated in Nevada. And during the time I was there, I was approached by one of the senior executives of this company to go meet with a Dr. James R. Maxfield at the Radiation Research Clinic over a couple miles from where we had the office in Dallas. And I didn't go for about a month, and then I met this same executive at a morning coffee in the executive tea room, and he said to me I hadn't been to see his friend Maxfield, and the reason he'd asked me to go was because I had talked to him about some work that I'd been doing in my time off, my private time at home, in my own laboratory, working with two things. One was a thermionic electrical converter, and the other was a rather novel method, I thought, of propelling a flying aircraft, which was circular-shaped and, flying saucer, you would call them today. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in the course of having told this guy just over coffee, well, he kind of got reasonably interested in it and told me I ought to go talk to a friend of his, and didn't do it. So 30 days passed, and he says to me, look, you haven't been to see Jim Maxwell yet. Please go this afternoon. I've booked you an appointment at 3. So I go over this place, and it's not like a place that sees people very often. It was open. The door was kind of ajar, but there was no cars in front of it and daylight. And I walked in. The lights were off down the hallway, and I walked down the hallway, and it was kind of dark. And suddenly this nurse, I guess a receptionist type lady, appears out of nowhere from the side and says, yes, can I help you? I said, oh, gee, I didn't know anybody was here. Look, I think I've got the right building. I'm looking for this Dr. James R. Maxfield. And she said, oh, yes, Dr. Maxwell is here. He'll be out in just a second. He's down the lab. And so, sure enough, within a minute or so, this big, tall dude comes out in a white medical coat, smoking a cigar and wearing cowboy boots. He says, yes, I've been expecting you. Come on into my office. And at this time is when I first got introduced to this clandestine organization in the United States that was headed by Dr. Edward Teller, and who Maxwell worked with Teller. And this organization had been working since the mid-'50s on something like 50-some-odd projects, all related directly to flying saucer technology, if you wish to put it down to that level. I was just the latecomer on the scene. They showed me about their base down at the South Pole and the ice cap, how you had to access it by submarine or something similar. And they explained to me, they knew what I was doing, they even knew what I was thinking virtually, because they asked me about my physics, and I said, well, look, thinking I was talking to some of the greatest physicists in the world, which I was. I didn't have my degree in that area, and I said, well, look, guys, sir, I've been working on a way to unify gravitational, electromagnetic, and magnetic effects. And he said, oh, look, spare me all that. He said, you're working on anti-gravity, and let's get to the meat of the matter. How are you doing it? And that's when when he started telling me that I need to finish my research with them down in Australia instead of America. And that's why I'm here today, is because those guys packed me up and sent me down here. We parted ways in 1972 or 3, I think it was. I was only with them for about a year. And I got rather disenchanted with all the technology they were holding back from the people. I still was young enough to think that we could save the world by giving technology to countries that needed food and grain and water and stuff shipped back and forth rather rapidly. But anyway, because of that, we parted ways in a real huff, and I kind of hid in the bush for a while because they really kind of thought it'd be better if I was buried. And then after coming out of that, I wrote the book, The Cosmic Conspiracy, to kind of be insurance, and told a lot of what I had gone through in there and left the rest for, I'll tell the rest if you get short with me. So now that's my side, Bob.
That's a
did you ever run into
story.
Did you ever run into Jim Maxwell at all on your side of it?
No, I haven't. Actually, now I've got 1,000 questions now, but one of the a prominent one on my mind here is what was Teller's function?
He seemed to be in charge or overseer of all the projects at the highest level. That's all that I was told.
See, this is something I've always wondered about the project down where I worked, and no one really ever spoke of him, but I got just a gut feeling that he was silently in charge of everything. And what you're saying is also very interesting, because a lot of what you're talking about seems to mimic some of the things we were working on.
In fact, Bob, when if I remember right, when Teller called you, when you originally got the call from him to contact the gentleman at EG&G, Teller said that he was no longer active but worked in a chief consultant capacity.
That's right.
Uh-huh. Something happened after I left because, in fact, I'll tell you, I had minders appointed down here who really run this country and run the prime ministers. My minders operate out of a group called the Melbourne Club, and they're, the old kind of British Raj, cigars and port white-haired guys. Anyway, they brought me into their halls of power, and I had lunch a few times with the kingpins there, and my mentor was Sir John Williams and Sir Henry Somerset. Anyway, we were sitting there one day at lunch, and they were talking amongst themselves about someone moving in on them, or they were like an undeclared war status, and that they were losing. And they never mentioned aliens or all that kind of stuff, so don't jump the gun. But I heard them say, well, yeah, Henry, it looks like we're going to lose this. They're just moving in. And I waited, and nothing else was said. And I said, well, excuse me, gentlemen. I said, by they, thinking I'd be clever, I said, do you mean the European Economic Community? Because we've been talking, large corporate or money deals in the country. And they both looked at me like I'd, done a root at the table or something and said, maybe we'll do some fishing up the farm this weekend, Henry. Yes, John. And, immediately I knew that I asked a question that I should have known the answer to already and didn't. Anyway, they indicated at that point that they were being taken over. Well, I got away from the organization and wrote the book and all that. Years passed, and about 7 years ago, I have a friend in Scottsdale, Arizona, named Conrad Murphy. And Conrad goes to a lot of places. He races boats and cars, and he's fairly active fellow in business. Anyway, Conrad was invited to give the morning devotional at some big business breakfast, like for the Arizona 500 Club or something like that. And so he rang me. He says, "Look, guess who I'm going to give the breakfast benediction right next to, who's sitting right next to me next week is Edward Teller." And I said, "Wow." I said, "Can you get to Dr. Teller and say, take a message. I want to talk to him." He said, "Not a problem." So I waited, and the week passed, and so Conrad rang me back, and he says, "Wow." He says, "Well, I sat next to him," and he said, it was all kind of, normal conversation, give the benediction, eat a bit. And he says, after he'd had a couple bites, I said to him, "Look, what do you know about this fellow named Stan Deyo, down in Australia working on anti-gravity and, flying saucers?" And he said, Teller looked at him very blankly and said, "Don't know the fellow." He says, "Oh, that's odd." And he reaches in his coat and pulls out a copy of my book with my photo on it and turns it up in front of Ed Teller. And he said the blood drained out of his face. And he looked away, and a general over on the side who was in uniform came over and took Teller and said, "Dr. Teller's got another meeting," and took him away. So I wondered at that point whether Teller was in charge of anything anymore. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. That's very interesting.
I've never been able to get back to the team. It's, I think they did lose. Whatever was trying to take them over did.
And so anyway, after all of that, Stan had to sort of lay low for a while, and he just sort of ended up staying in Australia.
Well, Art, I had to give up my U.S. citizenship to keep from being extradited at the time that they were trying to get to the bottom of this, okay? I'd love to be back in the States.
Were they trying to prosecute you for anything? I mean, what was...
Well, I wasn't sure
like
how it was going to go
of the story,
because... Sorry, say again?
See, that's a delay we have.
Oh,
Sorry, my fault.
No, just go on. It's just what was the reason? What were you? Were they trying to prosecute you for?
There were a number of things, Bob. One of them was that. There were a number of things. Oh, geez. Can I just put the dog on? She wants to say something here. Just a second. I don't know. As I said to you, I was doing some undercover work for the FBI, and they deny, of course, that there were 700 of us doing. Oh.
It's a clear dog from Australia. Believe me, it's coming through very clearly.
These are the most popular dogs on the planet. They've seen a bird out here, and they're trying to eat it.
All right. Well, the question is, Stan, were they trying to prosecute you, or were there threats on your life? How serious was it?
Both. When I went underground, they had really determined they were going to put me underground permanently in Melbourne.
Well,
as a result, I ran, and for a little over a year, I I traveled in the Australian bush with, let the hair grow out and wore the sunglasses and traveled with the hippies and whatever just disappeared. Finally, I got hungry and had to come back in. And when I did, I came in under an assumed name and worked for a while. But eventually they caught up with me because I applied for work in companies and had to show my passport. Can
I interrupt you for a second? What was the threat that you presented to them? Well, were they afraid of the information that you had, or?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was their main concern, that you were running around with information that you could possibly divulge to someone else, and.
Well, first of all, I would be able to identify them. I mean, I could identify, like by name, the people that were head of it in the Aeronautical Research Center at Fisherman's Bend in Melbourne, and in the Australian Club, who of course control the prime ministers of this country. And there was a number of things that I was privy to that would be rather embarrassing. But in their defense, let me say this. Now that I've had time to think about it, if I'd have been in their position and they were holding the secrets they were and were under the pressures they were, I would probably have ordered my execution as well. It's bigger than one person's life. It's a really, and I'm sure you would appreciate this, Bob. What we're talking about is a cover-up of incredible proportions.
Were you able to continue your research, or did they have all the requisite hardware?
Of course they did. I did do some. I did play around a bit what I could do, but I didn't have access to high-temperature coating. I couldn't put my barium titanate or anything else on the capacitive surfaces. But your that video you did with the little ship that had the thermionic converter on it, I don't know why you had to have an element, whatever it was, 1115, because we were quite aware that you could convert thermal energy at around 37 gigahertz on the sampling frequency. You could take random heat and convert it into flowing electric energy.
Well, that's just a thermionic generator. I mean, yeah.
That's it.
But all that does is that's just providing electrical power.
That's correct. As I say, we didn't need 115 to do that, though.
Well, yeah, no one does. I mean, that's how. Space thermionic generators just use plutonium to warm essentially a thermocouple using a Seebeck effect or whatever to produce electrical energy. However, the basis of the craft that I worked on, the electrical energy was merely a byproduct. That was not how the entire craft operated. That's where the 115 came in.
Now, the other thing I noticed here is you're using gravity wave A and gravity wave B focus fields. Mm-hmm. In the stuff we were working on, the field we would generate was in a toroidal field that would curl.
Well, that's exactly how this was generated. It was essentially in a toroid around the craft.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I just have some of the animators gave me some fantastic graphics that I haven't really been able to post anywhere, but I did want to put them up on the web somewhere because there are a lot of people that are interested in the actual propagation of the gravity field, and I was just about to give those to the guys that handle our web page, and it might be worth having a look at that.
What's the website?
Look,
is it on your site?
Yeah, just go to my site and you'll be able to jump right over. Stan, we're out of time in this half hour, but from what I've heard, I think that you two should be communicating.
I know. Well, I never have been able to reach Bob. He kind of did like I did, went to ground, I think.
Yeah, well, what I'll do is I'll provide Bob with your number in Perth.
Okay.
With your permission. Is that all right?
Fine. Excellent.
All right.
Nice talking to you, Bob.
Email might work well, too, right?
Yes, it does work well, and we can make those arrangements as well. So.
Well, that would be fine. Yeah, I'd like to talk to him.
All right, Stan. Thank you very much, and we'll put you two in contact. All right.
Good night.
All right. Good night from America, and we'll be right back with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. This is Coast to Coast AM. Gene and Bob, you're both back on the air. It's kind of interesting when you listen to people like Stan and you listen to people like Bob, as far as we've gone with the story, it's all laid out in such a calm matter-of-fact way that I think a lot of the public has a tendency to lose sight of the implications of what they're hearing. But you've told the story so many times, Bob, that I guess it comes out that way, sort of in a matter-of-fact way, huh?
Yeah, it pretty much does.
All right, let us return to your story. Now you've had a chance to get in the craft, and what are you doing? What are you working on? What are you seeing?
Well, if I remember, I have just met with Barry, and we're now going over things. Let's see. Well, this is, as I said, when I first realized exactly what was going on, what the implications were, and precisely what I'd be doing. In the room, this is a lab off the main hallway, okay. And in the room is one of the reactors from one of the crafts and one of the amplifiers from one of the crafts also.
How big are these?
The reactor, I would imagine, is about 2 feet, somewhere around 18 inches, 2 feet, somewhere in that general area.
Not really big then?
No, not large at all. Odd-looking thing. Has a bottom plate and then half of a sphere on top of it. The amplifier itself is about 2 feet in diameter, probably 4 feet long, cylindrical shaped, with something that would look like plates on the outside of it, black in color. These are very unusual, and essentially hollow, very, very unusual looking devices. This isn't actually the amplifier that I always catch myself calling it that. It's the emitter. It's the device that is moved on a pivot, and it's where the gravity wave actually is or emanates from. Quite similar to a horn on a microwave system. As it turns out, gravity waves behave a lot more like microwaves. At least the gravity waves that are being produced by this system do. So you have waveguides and things of that sort that you'd see in a microwave system. Those are the main components of the craft that were in the lab at that time.
What does that suggest or tell us about the nature of gravity?
Well, actually, you have to look and see what we really know about gravity. And, we really, as it turns out, don't know anything about gravity. As people have said, we can certainly measure its forces or measure its effect on things.
Right.
But really, to this date, there is no, and a lot of people don't know this, that there's truly no conclusive evidence at the present time that gravitational waves have ever been detected in a laboratory. Now, there have been several gravitational wave detectors built, and you can assume that they're detecting gravitational waves, but they can also be detecting many other energies of or fluxes of energies from who knows where. So it's something we can hardly measure, something we certainly know the existence of, but we know very, very little about it. It's essentially a big hole, a black hole, if you will, in physics as we know it.
Actually, the physicists that I've talked to are not altogether certain whether it's a push or a pull, and
I think are pretty sure it's a pull. But in physics today, physics itself is so fluid, yet so many people, either true physicists or armchair physicists or scientists, whoever you run into, really stand their ground on theories, yet most people tend to forget that these are just theories. They are not these are not facts. This is a topic we know very, very little about. And as I said some time ago, the prominent theory was that there are gravitons, alleged subatomic particles that actually, accounted for the force of gravity. However, people that do bring that up really don't know much about that theory either, because there was never an actual particle called a graviton. The whole concept behind a graviton was that because I'm trying to think of how to put this in layman's terms. They basically wanted to quantify gravity. Maybe I shouldn't get into this yet.
All right, you're looking at this thing. When you see it, do you know what it is?
What are we talking about?
Well,
I've already lost myself.
Okay.
We're looking at the amplifier itself?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Well, we'll save this technical discussion for later then. No, basically, I have no idea what I'm looking at.
Okay.
I had to be led through everything. The first demonstration that was presented to me was the actual operation of the reactor. Now, this in itself is nothing short of a miracle. We're dealing with something extremely small, maybe 2 foot square, maybe 6 inches high, just on outside dimensions. And the power output of something like this is equivalent to a little nuclear power plant. I mean, it's very impressive. Also, the fact that it's not producing any waste heat, which is a violation of the laws of thermodynamics.
You bet.
Bob, not to interrupt too much, but didn't you say that reactor put out as much power as Hoover Dam?
I remember I recorded all the data I had about it, but off the top of my head now, I don't remember the output of the reactor.
The lay people like me in the audience, so they can imagine the type of power we're talking about.
But it was a huge amount of power coming out of essentially a very small place.
What did the demonstration actually entail? I mean, what did you
first
see?
was certainly not the electrical output of it, but it was showing me the gravitational field around the device. Now, the only reason I started going off on a tangent about gravity is because I guess my whole point was that we don't have a machine. There is nothing in existence that can make gravity. I've seen a lot of people, just lay people, telling me stories about how they'll watch a film on NASA and how the astronauts are training and they're in a little chamber and they're floating around and they're, in a weightless environment. They don't realize it's an airplane doing a crash dive. That there is no machine that makes gravity. I mean, at all. Nobody has that.
On Earth.
On Earth, right. And here was a device that in operation was doing this. To do that, Barry told me, he started the reactor. When it was operating, after a short time, he told me to put my hand or attempt to touch the sphere on the top of the reactor. And as my hand got close to it, you can feel a force exactly like putting two like poles of a magnet together.
Wow.
Kind of that soft
push.
Yeah, a soft push, but what you're experiencing now is more of an anti-gravity field, which is something entirely different.
Oh, no, that's extremely interesting, Bob, because as you may have seen, they've done experiments now in Sweden with incredible magnetic fields generated in a fairly conventional manner, and they have actually levitated frogs and plants and all kinds of strange little things they've levitated with.
Is this documented?
Oh, absolutely.
I haven't heard anything about it. With a magnetic field?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Well, certainly frogs are not magnetic. I wonder is this just a raw magnetic field?
An
electromagnetic field?
An electromagnetic field, raw and gigantic, and they had a little chamber.
The big superconducting setup?
Yep. And
they're levitating a frog?
You got it. And
was it written up anywhere?
Oh, absolutely.
Huh. I wonder how this managed to pass me by.
I'm glad to be delivering so much news to you tonight, Doug. but obviously,
where can do you have any?
Is it on your website?
Not to run off on another tangent here, but is there a name of any of the people or anything you can reference me to where I could look?
I'm sorry, this second I can't. It was Finnish scientists. It was carried on NBC, ABC, CBS. All the networks had it. They had the photographs of the frog floating there.
Boy, that's a tremendous discovery there.
Well, it is. It just, when you mentioned to me the tremendous gravitational field and the effect on your biological hand, it immediately flashed to that experiment in Finland. So there you are. Anyway, so you pushed on
one more question. Have they levitated anything non-conductive, something with no water in it, like just a, well, I don't know, what a...
Well, they levitated...
plastic or something like that?
No, I don't think so. I think that it was plants, nuts, frogs, spiders.
So it was all biological material?
Yes. Yes, but you said yourself you felt the gravity with your hand. Now, that's the biological effect.
Right.
Anyway, I don't want to stunt your story. I just couldn't resist telling you that.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. That's actually very, very interesting to me. As time went on, we tossed a little golf ball at it, too. And it never did hit the sphere. It merely ricocheted off the field, which, again, was an impressive display.
Indeed. A golf ball is not in any way conductive. It has no moisture. It has no...
Well, or minimal amounts.
So minimal.
Aside from the fluid
Sure.
center golf balls.
Oh, that's right. They are fluid centers, aren't they?
But in either case, this was quite a impressive demonstration, just in the fact that this is producing a omnidirectional gravitational field around the unit. It was later connected up to the emitter and the amplifier, and where the gravitational beam out of the emitter can be focused. This, again, was extremely impressive. The gravitational wave or waves coming out of the emitter were focused into a small point and produced a little black dot in the air, hovering in the air.
Really?
Now, this is not to say it was a black hole, but what it was showing me was that it could bend light. Now, the only thing that can bend light is gravity. It's
that's right.
A lot of people say, well, light can be bent, so on and so forth. Usually that's diffracted or refracted, but where you can only bend light is with gravitational waves. So to me, again, this was another impressive demonstration.
But it really was a kind of a black hole.
Well...
In the sense that it was absorbing, at least in that
Well, a black hole, by definition itself, would be the source of the gravitational distortion, as opposed to, this
the byproduct
focusing on it. And, you're also, a black hole, a quantum singularity, and blah, 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 blah,
Sure,
blah.
but the theory is the same, isn't it? In other words, you saw the blackness because of the intense focus of...
Right, where light couldn't escape.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially true. Still, an extremely impressive demonstration to me.
Oh, yes.
So, basically, those were we did get to essentially fool around with it a little more, but he was updating me with basically what had been learned in the time that they had the craft there. He wasn't really specific on how long the craft was there. He was very elusive on many of the questions that I presented to him.
How many did you... Yeah, that's something I want to touch on. You must have had 1 million questions by then.
I did, and he would answer them peripherally. He wouldn't really get down to the meat of the question.
But at that point, Barry had a higher security clearance than you did, didn't he?
Yeah, that's probably true.
That may have been the reason.
Yeah, who knows if he was told to do that or that was his own decision or what. But again, he was just basically filling me in with what they knew and what my job was going to be. And this was it. This was finding out how this subsystem of the craft operated in the craft, operated outside of the craft. Could this eventually be duplicated using another power source. Could this power source be duplicated itself without using exotic materials, and so on and so forth. Sometime later, I got my only view inside the craft, which again was extremely exciting.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, can you describe what you saw in that craft?
Yeah, I was let in again by what's his name? Not Barry, Dennis. And we walked up a small roll-away stairway that led into the craft. It was very cramped getting in the doorway. The hatch was removed. I really didn't pay attention to see how it was fashioned to it or if there were hinges or anything. A lot of people have asked me that, but it was, you don't spend time looking at how a door was connected somewhere when there's a flying saucer in front of you. In either case, I went inside. Initially, you must bend over to get in. There is very little headroom.
So whoever originally flew in this was small.
Right, whatever flew in it was tiny.
And if you notice, Art, if you're looking at the model of the sport model there, out near the equator of the disc, I mean, it literally comes to a point, and it graduates as you go towards the center. So obviously, the ceiling is very low near the edge.
And for the benefit of the audience, with internet access, I've got a photograph of the sport model on my live studio cam right now.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
As you walk into the craft, first of all, I should address a few questions that people constantly ask me.
All right,
and,
please.
One of them is certainly, well, how did you feel going into the craft? Wasn't it the most exciting thing in your life? And I know I've said this 1,000 times before to many other people, but it was not, the feeling at that time was not of excitement. It was a very ominous feeling.
Ominous.
Very much so. It was more of a feeling like, it's actually, I really can't describe it. It's difficult to put into words, but it was a very ominous feeling, more like, are you sure we should be here? But, of course, after the fact, it was certainly exciting, but it was a very, very odd feeling because, and with no pun intended, it was a very unearthly setting inside.
All right, that's a perfect place to hook them and hang them up until we come back from the news. So everybody relax. We'll be right back. All right. Bob Lazar and Gene Huff are my guests. I'm Art Bell. This is Coast to Coast AM.
Here again is Art.
So what about being inside that craft? What do people generally ask, and how do you respond?
Well, first of all is the overall description inside. Entering the craft is, like I said, certainly uncomfortable for an adult human being.
You realize that you're not in a place that was designed for humans.
Exactly. And it certainly is different from anything that you're familiar with. And what I mean to say about that is everything is basically one color. Normally, any area you're surrounded in is always different textures, different colors, so on and so forth. The inside of the craft is essentially all a dull pewter aluminum color, very metallic looking. Mm-hmm. There are no sharp right angles anywhere, and the description I've given before is basically the craft looks like it was just injection molded, essentially like the model was. There are no seams anywhere. Everything inside the craft looks like it was fashioned out of wax, heated for a short time, and then cooled to where everything basically melted into what was next to it, what it was sitting on. That's about the best description I can give as to how the inside looked.
Seamless
and very Again, no right angles anywhere. structure of the craft, the skin from the outside was smooth. Inside, this is very difficult to describe, but if you can picture yourself inside a disc of a flying saucer shape, and you're inside looking at the wall surrounding you, there was an additional structure, kind of a secondary wall. It was kind of repetitive archways that looks like it was either for structural integrity or, as we later found out, something to do with the waveguide and the gravity amplifiers themselves. But if you have the box there you're looking at, you notice what I'm saying is kind of difficult. There's a little booklet that came in there that has a nice cutaway view of the craft, but it's very difficult to describe without drawing a picture or seeing something visual.
Well, the lucky people on the internet can see what I'm holding up. The others are going to have to make do with your word pictures, or go out and get a copy of the tester model. Or how else might people see? Is there something on your, well, again, it would be your website, so it's just people with computers. So we've got to formulate word pictures for people without.
Yeah, I'm not really good at that, but that's basically what there are 3 levels to the craft. When you enter into the main level, and that's basically what you see. As far as what's on the main level, well, first of all, the dimension of the craft is about 52 feet in diameter, about 16 feet high. That's just the overall measurement. Now, back on the inside of the craft, what you'll see in the center of the craft is the reactor itself. Extending from the reactor up through the top of the craft is the waveguide. It kind of looks like a little chimney, more or less. Surrounding the reactor in the center of the craft are 3 seats. These seats all face one direction. Also near these 3 seats are the 3 gravity amplifiers themselves. They look like consoles, just solid rectangular objects. When I say consoles, I don't mean there's any buttons, lights, or anything of that sort. And in fact, there were no buttons, lights, switches, or wiring in the entire craft.
Really?
Really. That's also quite an impressive feat.
No levers, no buttons, no lights, no switches.
However, I did not get to go in one part of the craft, so I really can't say what was there. But I do have a good idea as to what was. Now, this was all on the center level. Immediately underneath, there's a small breakaway part of the floor as you walk in to the craft over to the left. It's a collapsible hexagonal, very unique doorway. People have asked me, have you ever seen anything in any of these crafts, any of the technology that could be used today, something simple? And that's certainly one of them. Aside from the high-tech gravitational propulsion system, so on and so forth, something very, very simple to understand and easy. And anyone that's taken a 6-pack of beer or bottles or anything like that, you'll notice that if you push on the sides of you take all the bottles out, you push on the sides of the box, it all collapses flat.
Yes.
And the floor itself was hexagonal in shape and made of little square hexagons like that, of thin metal, with a little notch cut out. So basically, to operate it, you just stuck your hand in the notch and pushed, and the entire thing collapsed flat and left a hole open. However, when it's, I'm getting tangled with my words here because there's so many other things going through my mind. When it's extended and the opening is closed off, it's a very strong structure, because you're standing on the top of hexagons. The metal is relatively thick, even though you kind of have an idea of what I'm trying to present here?
I
A
absolutely
visual?
do. Of course, I understand how it derives the strength, yes.
So yes, it's very easy to collapse one way, but that's one simple thing I thought would find uses somewhere, somehow, something that could be made right now. In fact, I've fashioned one out of thin metal. I have absolutely no use for it, but it's just one of those strange things. I've never seen anything like it, and it's certainly something that could be, I don't know, used in some sort of architecture somewhere.
Now, the craft you were in had all of its, the generator, the amplifier.
Right, this was all on the first level.
Everything was intact.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, let me take that back. One of the amplifiers was removed.
All right.
On this craft. When you do collapse this little porthole, you can fit your body through at least the upper part of it and look underneath. This is the lower level of the craft. This is where the emitters, what I sometimes call the gravity amplifiers, hang down. These are three of the cylindrical-shaped black objects, 2 foot in diameter, 4 feet long, that actually emit gravitational waves from them.
Like a microwave horn.
Right. They are positioned directly underneath the larger rectangular gravity amplifiers on the first level and are, in fact, connected to them. The actual physical connection between the emitters and the subflooring above it, again, is something very interesting. It's a short piece of pipe, I'd say, maybe 12 inches longer, maybe slightly, 12 inches long, maybe a little longer than that. But this mounting flexes in any direction, but it's a solid piece of pipe. It's something very, very unusual, and we see the same thing being used on the waveguide to the reactor. From what we could see, by applying an electric charge to different parts of this structure, it would bend quite easily.
Really?
Yeah, it's again something very difficult to describe without drawing it exactly how this operated. But it was not made of in a telescopic form where you'd see something like a car antenna where it would collapse down on each section would collapse down onto one another. It was a solid piece, if you can imagine just a solid piece of pipe, and applying an electric charge to it and having the pipe bend but remain rigid after it had done so. Anyway, this compromised composed the focusing system for these three amplifiers. They received signals from other parts of the craft. The amplifiers would focus in on a certain point, and this is basically how the amplifiers were aimed. And the craft had, again, it's kind of a lengthy explanation, but there were two different modes the craft we found would operate in. One is called Omicron, and one is called Delta. The Omicron configuration was the standard operating mode of the craft, and it's where it used one single amplifier to maintain its elevation in the sky. One of the other amplifiers was rotated 90 degrees and essentially pointed straight out ahead of the craft. So with one amplifier working, it essentially produced an anti-gravitational pillar to stand on. With the amplifier that was rotated 90 degrees, instead of what we would normally think along the lines of propulsion, where a jet would essentially exhaust material, hot gases out the back,
right?
Where we would normally think along the lines of a propulsive force, what the craft did was essentially create a distortion in front of it.
A distortion. Now,
a gravitational distortion.
Is that like sort of creating a well, in effect?
Exactly. It would create a little distortion, a divot in time-space, if you want to call it that. A well is a good analogy too. to where the craft would actually, this is kind of the low performance mode, if you want to give it a name, but where the craft would actually continuously slide downhill.
Yes.
A very awkward, strange mode of propulsion. I mean, we have nothing that would even really relate to something like that. But it's kind of backwards, if you see what I'm saying.
I do.
The other mode of propulsion...
And you, before we go to that, you would imagine this mode of propulsion to be used in what configuration? In other words, in an atmosphere, for example?
In an atmosphere, just maneuvering around small objects.
Source of gravity, probably near a planet or moon, would you say?
I would imagine so, yeah. I don't think it would be used in space. There would be some, by definition of this mode, it requires some force, some large amount of gravity to be acting on the craft. So you would have to be near some sort of gravitational body.
All right.
I would imagine as it was hovering around the ground, this is what would it...
All right, makes sense. And then there was another mode.
The other mode is the delta configuration, and this is how it normally travels through space and makes large jumps. The craft flies with the belly facing the direction you want to go, not as you would normally see the craft in a science fiction movie.
Ah.
The gravity amplifiers are all brought up to power, and they're focused on a single point. This point now becomes an area of intense gravitational distortion, many, many times more than what we were talking about before. And this is where the true warp drive comes into effect. This is where you actually bend, you begin to distort space and time. And instead of the craft actually flying, you're basically distorting the fabric of space around the craft and move without actually traveling. You're not moving in a way.
So if I'm visualizing this correctly, it's kind of like the other mode, except far more intense, and you're constantly moving toward this warp, or with this warp. I don't know which way to think about it.
Well, you actually become part of the other space. It's a pretty wild concept, but something that really isn't unknown to us. As I've stated before, to most people this sounds like wild science fiction. However, we know most of these things are possible. We know, for example, as I stated in that tape, that we can see stars that are behind the sun. And the reason for that is the intense gravitational field of the sun bends not just light, but it bends space around the sun, and we can see some things behind it. We know that we know space, gravity, and time are all interrelated. We know this for a fact. We know that around areas of intense gravitational fields, time essentially slows down. I mean, it's certainly been theorized that if one was to orbit a black hole, an area of tremendous gravitational distortion of gravity will, for instance, that time would virtually stop.
Right.
So with all these things interacting, this is how you can travel a great distance with essentially no time elapsing. First of all, you're bending space towards you. By doing that, you're actually slowing time. Not to say that this is a time machine, it's just a byproduct. Whenever you produce a gravitational field, whenever you're around an intense gravitational field, time slows. It's just
Bob,
the way it is.
Bob, did you discern all of this yourself after long examination? Oh, no, this was...
Absolutely not.
Okay, they gave you this then.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right, and so, God, you've got... so then you're in the craft. Then your job, I guess, is to go back to the gravity amplifier and the rest of it that they've already got assembled and try and back engineer the thing or try to make it work with materials that we have here on Earth. Is that correct?
Basically so. Well, basically is to start at the very beginning and look at the reactor and try and see how from ground level the device operates. And this is where apparently I came in to the project.
All right, and that is where we must pause. Back now to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Gene, basically the silent one right now, sort of helping out as he can. let's see, Bob. In the interest of time, because we could spend 10 hours with this. Perhaps not before you fell asleep, but
well, we did make some coffee here. I detected I started rambling and not saying anything, so hopefully this will help. We are about 3 hours past my bedtime.
I see. I appreciate it. The nation appreciates it. This really is an incredible story. Now, briefly, you went to work, obviously, trying to back engineer this.
Right.
How far did you get? What did you learn? Well,
not very, and I need to digress for a moment here, and this is where I learned one of the reasons why I was hired. Initially, our work started on the reactor. We figured that's the center point of everything, and this is where we should really concentrate our efforts, and apparently that's what the people before me did, too. Apparently, there was an attempt to analyze the operation of one of these reactors, and I got to read the notes that the gentleman before me had left. There was a fatality, or actually 3 fatalities, if I remember, when they attempted to do this. For some reason, they attempted to get into the reactor while it was in operation under load, and it was never very clear in their notes as to why anyone decided to do that. However, again, in the interest of time, I'll cut this short, but they did attempt to do that. The reactor did explode, and the gentlemen were killed. I was to replace one of these people.
Great.
So this is...
Did anybody at any point suggest that you go in?
Oh, no. I think this is something... I think they reached a point of frustration, couldn't get anywhere, and, went on from there. Again, this didn't sound very sensible to me, but this was a story that was relayed to me, and just something I thought I'd pass along.
All right, go right ahead.
We then found, again, we had identified
an element,
a super heavy element, one that doesn't naturally occur on Earth, and certainly one that we haven't synthesized. This element was identified as 115. Now, normally, the higher level elements, the ones that we have produced in accelerators, decay in a fairly short time. In this case, what we were seeing was a stable element, one that was not undergoing any radioactive decay, which is very unusual. However, again, this is something that science and chemists have already theorized, that there should be an island, essentially an island of stability for elements around the 114, 115, 116 area. However, we certainly haven't been able to produce anything that high up on the periodic chart, but apparently, this is what we were observing.
How much of this element 115 was available?
200. Well, there were 223 grams in the craft, in the reactor. 223
grams. I heard a story, I think it may have been from John Lear, that, and this jumps us way ahead, but that you somehow got some of element 115 out of that area. Is that true?
I really don't want to comment on that.
All right, I didn't think so. John didn't want to say much about it either, but that was rumor. We'll let it stand as a rumor. All right, so element 115, something that we don't have yet. I think we have progressed a little bit up the scale. But we're certainly not at 115. Where are we now? What is our...
I believe the last isolated was 112.
112.
And
yep.
Most of the more recent work has been done in Darmstadt, Germany.
All right.
In fact, I believe there's their plan to produce element 116 is coming up next. I think they plan on I don't really. I think it was californium and
No.
calcium or something. Do you remember that, Gene?
Yes, I think they were going to fuse curium with calcium, and they were going to end up with element 116, which they then thought would decay in a chain of unknown nuclides and see where the island of stability actually settled.
But they are very close to attempting to pierce that island of stability and seeing what's going to happen. However, producing one or two atoms of it really isn't going to let them determine how the substance is going to react, but at least they're there. They're almost to the point now where they can begin to look at some of these exotic substances.
Right. There are a lot of people waiting to see if they can perform any experiments or find this, gravity A that Bob alludes to. But really, when you read, and I'm certainly a lay person, when you read on these, for instance, the website for the Lab for Heavy Ion Research in Darmstadt, Germany, you can see that they actually detect these atoms when they make them, and getting an atom or two, it doesn't put them anywhere near having a quantity of it that you could hold in your hand and actually study for any macro scale type effect.
You bet. Bob, how long were you then at S4 doing your work?
It was from December of 88 to April of 89.
December of 88 to April of 89. Okay. What went wrong? When did the whole thing begin to go to sour, and why?
Boy, there's a long story. Okay, the Reader's Digest, this story.
Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, a Reader's Digest version of this, which is typically longer than the entire story itself.
Do you want me to tell it?
If you got a shorter version than I do, well, go ahead.
All right, how about this? At what stage of work were you when it began to go bad?
Well, very early. Well, go ahead, Gene. Give it a try.
Well, Bob had been on an on-call basis, and right when he got to the point where he's told you about up to this point, they stopped calling him into work. And this was very frustrating. He wasn't a fun guy to be around. And what had happened is when he, as he told you before, he had to sign documents allowing them to monitor his phone and fax and computer and anything that came into his house over a phone line. And to make a long, sad story short, Bob's wife was having an affair, and they found out. And when they gave him his security clearance, they deemed him to be financially stable, emotionally stable, and just generally stable. And so now they knew that he was going to be having some emotional problems, and they stopped calling him. Ultimately, they heard his wife admit that she had had an affair to her mother over the phone, and she ultimately told Bob, and they called him in and yanked his security clearance, saying that they deemed him to be a sure candidate for emotional instability, and that he could reapply again in 6 to 9 months. So
I've never heard any of this before.
You've never heard this?
No.
Yeah, that's the reason that he lost his clearance. It had nothing to do with him.
All right. Well, you had signed all these papers, Bob. What motivated you to go public? I mean, that's weird in itself. I mean, why did you go public? Surely you had to worry about your life. You had to worry about your career. And I don't know whether everybody knows, but you were virtually, the modern term is erased. Your educational records were erased. A lot of the work you did in New Mexico was erased, save for one little mistake. I think your name was, and still is, recorded in a phone book, isn't it?
Right. For the most part, for the most part, everything was.
What was it they missed? Where was that? A phone book where?
That was, it was an old phone book in Los Alamos.
Los Alamos.
However, certainly they couldn't erase the, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the newspaper article at that time clearly stated on the front page of the local Los Alamos newspaper that I was a physicist working in Los Alamos labs.
Yes.
So, they certainly couldn't go back and make that disappear. But
they made a lot disappear, didn't they?
yeah, well,
However, Art, you know, they did lie to begin with. As you know, George Knapp, for your listeners, is at that point in time was a news anchor for the CBS affiliate here in Las Vegas.
Channel 8.
Yes, and he had extensive correspondence with Los Alamos as well as Kirk Meyer, which was one of the subcontractors that Bob worked for. And they all denied. Kirk Meyer did say he was issued a Z number, which was a number required to be an employee and to get a paycheck. But none of them